Okay, so, how could I forget? That's my favorite part. I'm Yewande Komolafe, and I'm a cooking writer for the New York Times, and today I'm making a traditional Kouign-Amann. Kouign-Amann is a traditional viennoiserie from Breton. Kind of looks like a pie, and you slice it in little triangles. It's made from a laminated dough, which means that it has a bread dough base and butter is folded in many turns, and that gives it like nice little layers. It has a pound of butter in it. It's really rich, it's buttery, it's toasty. It's such an experience getting to make it. It's a process that like drew me in. I learned how to make it from a pastry chef based in Montreal. I did a pastry tour of Montreal really randomly with my husband, and one of the places that we stopped by was a pastry shop called Kouign-Amann. Being in New York and working in pastry kitchens, what I thought was Kouign-Amann were these little tiny muffin-shaped pastries. And so when I went into that shop and I asked for a Kouign-Amann, they cut me a slice of something, and I was like, oh wow, like what is this? And my husband and I shared it and kind of just like looked at each other like, this is so delicious and so amazing. And so I called the bakery and I said, I'm really interested in your Kouign-Amann. I would love to come learn how to make it. Chef Nicolas said yes. He was like very excited. I ended up just going for 2 morning shifts. I was there like really eager at like 6 a.m. in the morning, and he showed me how to make it. He showed me all the turns. We had like a really lively discussion about how he ended up there making this very specific pastry. So I'm gonna start with making the bread dough because that has to rise for a little bit. I always like to put water in the bowl first. If there's water in the bottom, it gets everything, as opposed to like putting the dry ingredients first. Stir all this together and let it sit for about 6 minutes. And you can tell the yeast is active when it starts to foam. It's getting a little foamy, which is great. It means that my yeast is active. The flour goes in. I like to add the salt on top of the flour. Salt is something that deactivates yeast, and so I never really add it directly into the yeast and water solution. So this was something that Chef Nicolas used. It's not traditional, but he said he liked it because it gave an extra like nutty flavor to the pastry. And I thought that was brilliant. And I've been putting toasted sesame oil in a lot of my baked goods. Like people can't really tell what it is, but it's like nuttiness that it adds. I'm mixing it to form a shaggy dough. I'm gonna cut up my butter. The smaller it is, the easier it is to fold into the dough. So that mixes until you form a smooth dough. As the dough hook is like going around, I can see that the gluten strands have formed because it's like pulling the whole dough with it as opposed to just pulling sections of the dough. So the dough looks really elastic to me right now, and I can tell that it's done. I'm just scraping the dough out into a bag, and I'm gonna refrigerate this. The reason I do this step in the refrigerator is because I want a slow rise. I want to develop flavor in the refrigerator. The next step is making the butter for lamination. One thing that I found different about this specific pastry is that the butter for lamination contains sugar. Typically with croissants or puff pastry, you're just folding butter into the dough. But this specific dough has a combination of butter, sugar, and salt folded into it. Sugar, still a pinch of salt. So I'm just creaming butter and sugar here. So this step is literally just to combine the butter and sugar. You're not necessarily trying to whip air into it. I'm spreading the butter into a 10-inch round. You don't have to be extremely precise. Okay. What I like to do is cover it and then just wrap it. I'm gonna put this in the fridge because at this point my dough is still rising. This step, I'm gonna make the syrup that goes over the pastry while it's baking. This is the part of the recipe where you could play around a little bit. I'm seasoning it with a bunch of spices that I like. So I've got some cardamom, some cloves, cinnamon and ginger, and some orange peel. That smells amazing. Okay, so my sugar goes in now, and then water. This smells amazing and has come to a boil, so I'm going to turn it off and let the orange peel and spices just steep in there. I'm just going to strain it to get the solids out. Good. And that's my syrup. I know this is a non-stick pan, but I just, as a second step of assurance to make sure it doesn't stick, I'm just putting a little coat of butter, and then I'm going to put syrup on the bottom of the pan. And then I'm just going to set this aside while I roll out my dough. So this is my dough after it has proofed. I can smell it. It smells really yeasty. I put a nice layer of flour on my surface because the dough's a little sticky. So the goal here is to roll this into a 12-inch round. And I keep lifting it to make sure that no part of this is sticking. Something that I like to do in between steps is to brush off the excess flour. The flour is really just to make sure it's not sticking. I don't want to add flour to my dough. This is my butter that I put in the fridge. It sat out for about 15 minutes to soften a little bit, but you want it soft enough that when you're folding it, it doesn't break. It's just pliable. I'm going to shape this circle into an 8-inch square. And how I do that is by lifting it. So I'm folding over the butter. I brush off any excess flour. So I have a nice little square. So now I'm gonna roll this out into a rectangle. And I do that by kind of tapping down first, making sure the edges are a little tapered. You don't want to press it too much because don't forget you fold it in butter. So the more you press it, the more like the butter is going to be pushed out towards the edges of the dough. I want that butter to stay in there. And I keep checking it to make sure there's no stickage. I'm going to take the top side, fold it over, just about a third, and then take the bottom short side and fold that so that the two short sides meet. I'm putting some pressure just to adhere the sides, and then turn the rectangle around so that the short sides are now parallel to you. So that was the first fold. The second fold is what I'm doing now. I'm again rolling it out into a rectangle. If the butter starts to feel soft, just put it back in the refrigerator and let the dough rest and the butter chill. Also, if you find that you're rolling it out and it's springing back on itself, that means your dough has to relax. And so put it in the refrigerator and let it sit for about 10 minutes. Okay, so I'm doing the second fold. And again, I'm folding over the top, just over a third of the dough, pressing it down, and then pressing it down. At this point, I'm gonna roll it out into a square and then fold in the corners so that they all meet in the middle. So I'm gonna turn it again, add some flour. Don't be afraid, add as much flour as you need to prevent stickage. Okay, so now this is a square. Brush it to get off any excess flour, and then bring the corners in to the middle. I can feel that my dough's getting a little warm. My butter is starting to seep through a little bit. So I'm gonna put this in the refrigerator to relax the dough and chill the butter again before I work it. I'm gonna do that for about 10 minutes. Woo! So I've let this chill in the fridge to relax the dough and chill the butter. Roll this out and then push the edges in to form a round. So to put this in the pan, I'm gonna flip it so that this is the bottom. So I'm gonna dock the dough and just poke it with a knife. This is so that the syrup actually goes in the pastry. Spread this around with my fingers and then cover it. And I'm gonna let it sit for about 30 minutes to relax the dough. You're not looking for the dough to poof up. You're not looking for it to double in size. This is really just to relax the dough. Now I'm gonna put some dimples on the surface of the dough just to sort of dock the surface. Oh, look at the little tart. So this has been in the oven for 45 minutes. One of the steps that I was shown was to flip the tart to make sure that the syrup gets on the bottom and the top, and the bottom gets nice and caramelized. This part is a little tricky because you're working with a hot pan. This is gonna get hot and you're trying to flip it, so just go slow with this part. And if you flip it and it falls into the sink like it did at home, I still ate it. It was still delicious, so not all is lost. I'm flipping it onto a surface that doesn't have a lip because I'm gonna slide it right back in. All that butter. So I'm pouring in some syrup on the bottom of the pan so that the top gets a good dip in that syrup. Okay. It's been about 20 minutes. Oh, it's nice and golden brown. For me, this is like the scariest part of it. What a beauty. I'm gonna let this sit for about 5 minutes before I move it to the serving platter. It smells amazing. It smells buttery and all the love that went into making it. I'm gonna eat the whole thing. That's so good. The top is a little chewy because of all the sugar syrup. The salt finish, I'm getting that. It's like really toasted because of the sesame oil. All the spices that we steeped in the sugar syrup, I'm getting like little orange and clove and cardamom notes. I'm so happy with this. I hope everyone enjoys the process as much as I did. It's a wonderful reward at the end. And I think that this is something that's for sharing. It's something that you like present at the table. Like, look at all my hard work. This reminds me of summer in Montreal and walking into the bakery and being hit with this smell of baking pastries and syrup and all the wonderful things. You guys have to taste this like right now. Everybody has to taste this while it's still warm.